What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Joey, and today we're going over a tier list for all the red cards coming out in Set 1 Origins of Riftbound League of Legends TCG. Now, this isn't just a run-of-the-mill tier list. What we're doing here today really is determining which of these cards are going to be most high priority for you guys to pick up if you are going to be playing the color red. We have a few rankings here. The first one being every red deck plays me, with maybe some extremely minor exceptions, but for the most part, this is going to be a red staple card you want to collect if you're playing this color. The next level is going to be needed in my archetype. Maybe not every red deck will play the card, but if you are playing a specific legend, you may want to heavily consider picking up that card. The category after that is playable or maybe a little niche. Maybe even certain multiplayer cards will go in this category. Cards that you should keep an eye on, maybe not super necessary. And then the next category being unplayable. That's sort of like our F/trash tier. And then sideboard, this is sort of like a separate category where the card's probably pretty good, but maybe only really good in certain matchups. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started with Annie Fiery. So I will admit, Annie is probably my least tested deck. Yes, even less tested than Garen. But I would say this card is obviously playable in the archetype. I don't know if it's 100% needed. I think the purple Annie is probably a little bit more vital to the deck, where you can recycle a lot of your spells. This giving you bonus damage is maybe usable in certain matchups, but for that reason, I'm probably going to go ahead and put Annie Fiery in playable/niche, really just niche within its own archetype. Next up, we have Firestorm. Deal 3 to all enemy units at a battlefield. This is a normal speed spell, not action or reaction, so it's pretty limited in its usage, to be honest. And because it's not an action or reaction speed spell, you only want to really use this card when your opponent has already conquered battlefields. And if they're conquering battlefields with 3 might units, that's great, but a lot of times that's going to be matchup dependent. Like against Victor, for example, they're going to probably conquer with 1 might tokens if you have nothing in those battlefields. So I think for that reason, Firestorm probably side deckable. I wouldn't say quite unplayable, but I think it's going to take the right matchup for it to actually see play. Incinerate, 2-cost action spell, deal 2 to a unit at a battlefield. This is one of the Proving Grounds cards, and we know that's meant to be a little bit of a lower power level to basically introduce people into the game. So I think this card is going to go into unplayable because there's so many other spell removal options in red, especially at action speed, that I don't think this is going to be one of the better ones, to be honest. Next, we have Unlicensed Armory, which seems like it was solely printed for Jinx. Discard 1, tap it, choose a friendly unit. The next time it dies this turn, you may pay a red to recall it exhausted. This basically gives a Jinx deck the set leader ability in the form of a gear. However, I think that there are a lot of different ways to build Jinx. Jinx might be one of the most flexible leaders in the game in terms of how many ways you can build it. So I think you'd have to play a very dedicated build to really get the most mileage out of this card. So instead of putting it in needed in my archetype, I'm going to put it in playable niche. But again, probably only in the really right build of Jinx. Next is Void Seeker. Incredible card, kills a whole large pool of units with 4 might or less and draws a card. This is definitely going in every red deck plays me. At the very least, you're considering this card if you don't have better removal options, and at the very least, you're probably sideboarding this card because it's just a great removal option, replaces itself. Yes, it has the power cost, but this card does a whole lot for that, so I think it's completely worth it. And obviously, Kai'Sa's playing this card, among other things. I played in my Darius build. I think it's a very good card. Next is Blind Fury, 4-cost, 2 red power. Action, each opponent reveals the top card of their main deck. Choose one and play it, ignoring its cost, then recycle the rest. This is 100% a multiplayer card, so we're going to put this in playable niche, but again, with the caveat that it's really just multiplayer. Really cool, fun in like that 4v4 type of format, but in 1v1 competitive or even teams, probably not. Although teams, maybe if you can get both opponents to flip a card and play it for you, that could be kind of cool. So maybe it could be competitive in some sort of team format. Rinrir Thundersong, giving us a strong introduction to Floodgates in Riftbound. Definitely every red deck plays me. This card is getting looks in every single red deck, whether it's ramping like Volibear, whether it's control like Kai'Sa, whether it's aggro like Darius in my Darius build. I think this is a card that every red deck wants to play because you just want to cast it if you have an established board that can win that turn and you just don't want to deal with your opponent's spells, interruptions, what have you. Incredible red card, definitely a staple. Next up, Darius Trifarian. Once again, I'm going with every red deck plays me. Some might think this is only an aggro card, but it doesn't really need you to play other units in order to get its restand effect. So even in a deck like Kaisa that's more control oriented, you can play this card, cast a spell, Darius stands up, goes and grabs a point, goes and fights in the battlefield, does what you need it to do. It's a very flexible card for that reason. The fact that it doesn't solely rely on playing other units or even on Legion itself. It's super flexible. It can even start Legion for you in certain decks. Really good card that, once again, I think every red deck is going to take a look at for sure. Draven, he gains a might for every point you've scored. I'm going with needed in my archetype. I think this is definitely more for the red aggressive decks like Jinx and Darius. I do think decks like Volibear and decks like Kaisa will have a little bit of a harder time using this card because they're just not scoring as fast typically. But I do think if you're playing something red, something aggressive, even something a little bit more mid-rangey that can still score early, Draven just gets so overstated so quickly that it becomes an insanely good rate for a 5-drop, becoming 6, 7, 8, 9 power. Really strong card in the right deck. Falling Star, I feel like this card is so undercosted. Yes, it does have the 2 red power, but only costing 2 runes in general. Maybe this should have costed 3 and 2 power. I don't know. This card's crazy. You kill a 6 might card or you kill 2 3 might cards. The flexibility is insane. The anti-aggro potential, the sideboard potential. I think every single red deck is looking at this card no matter what. Next up is Red Jinx. You can't load in a Jinx deck without playing this card, right? 100% needed in the archetype. I think the discard 2 makes any other red deck that would maybe look at playing it for an accelerate option take a second guess. I don't think it's going to work in most decks, but 100% if you're playing Jinx, you're playing this card. It's extremely strong with the assault. It is overstated in that sense. The discard 2 you could say is kind of fair, but only really Jinx can deal with that cost. Raging Firebrand, 6 energy, 1 red power. When you play me, the next spell you play this turn costs 5 less. I'm going to go ahead and put it in probably playable niche. You're looking at decks like Kaisa that want to cast spells for this. I would say Volibear if it had 5 might, but the fact that it only has 4 means you're not actually getting value off your legend ability. So I think it might be playable in just about only Kaisa, but even then it's a little bit of a weak unit to be casting 6 and a power. So playable niche, unplayable, definitely lives somewhere in those 2 realms. When we get stronger and stronger spells, maybe things that interact more with actually playing units, there can be some more combo strings there. I just don't really see it right now. I might even drop this guy down unplayable because I just don't see Kaisa lists playing it right now. Maybe there'll be potential there in the future for sure. Ravenborn Tome, 3 energy, tap it. Next spell you play deals 1 bonus damage. So this is going to be Fiery Annie that just about any deck can play, although technically any red deck can also play Fiery Annie. This is a little bit cheaper. It is a gear, doesn't give you immediate board presence. This could maybe be a side deck option, but I feel like you're just wasting space and trying to string up combos between this and spells when you could just play more removal spells or more units that maybe have removal. I'm going to go ahead and probably put this in unplayable. I just don't think this type of card is going to see a whole lot of play, but maybe someone will prove me wrong. Next up is Shakedown. Now, I'm definitely a little bit biased. This is a card that I really like, and I know a lot of other people aren't super high on the card. I wouldn't say every red deck plays me. I do think the power cost early is tough for some red decks to really utilize well. I think this card is absolutely stellar in Darius, but I don't know if I would say needed in my archetype. I don't want to play Darius without the card because I think it's a great Legion activator, and also just I want to draw 2 as much as I can, and if they want me to kill a unit, that's also fine. But I'm going to go ahead and put it in playable niche. I do think there are going to be red decks that take very good advantage of the card, and there are going to be some red decks that just don't quite need it. Probably like Jinx, for example. You've got a ton of draw in Jinx already. Don't really need a card like this. Tryndamere, oh man, how much I love this champion from League of Legends, and I have not seen him played in a single game or deck since the super early reveals of Riftbound. He's just super costly, both on the energies and on the rune. His effect to get the extra point, yes, it's the only one in red, but it is just so convoluted to pull off. I'm going to go ahead and unfortunately put my boy in unplayable for the time being. I think every single red deck is looking at Vayne. This card is just so incredible. It attacks for immense value. It doesn't defend all that well, but it has the ability to bring itself back to your hand and enter play ready as long as your opponent controls a battlefield. Your opponent's going to take points at some point, so this is going to be ready more often than not, and it can keep preserving itself by returning back to your hand. Yes, it's a little costly. That's a 5 energy, 1 power play to do so, but card's incredible. I do think every red deck for the most part is looking to slot in 1 to 2 of this card. The cool thing about the 1 of is this card's constantly recyclable thanks to the fact that it comes back to your hand. However, if you play 1, you're drastically lowering your odds of actually drawing a copy during a game. So 2 of might be the sweet spot, but no real reason to play 3 in a lot of cases because that recurability, such a good flexible card, doesn't demand too much on your deck building. Next up is Vi, one of the most powerful red cards in the early reveal season for Riftbound. This card says recycle basically as many cards from your trash as you want, and she gains that much power for the turn. She also has ganking. This thing interacts with some cards in some really cool ways. We talked about this in the video before. Sky Splitter, Cadrigan. This thing is really strong. I do, however, think it takes the right deck to use it. Obviously, Jinx being one of those decks where you set up your discard very easily. All the other red decks, they do set up discard because you play units, they eventually die, you play spells, they go to the trash, yes, but you're not fueling that graveyard as quickly as Jinx does, so you're not getting as much value out of Vi game after game, and in those cases, you're maybe playing a 2 of Vi, so I'm going to go ahead and put Vi in more so needed in my archetype, although I think there are even Jinx builds that aren't really going to play her, but still a really strong card for sure. Immortal Phoenix is a super strong card, recurable out of your trash, and red has a ton of its own removal spells, not to mention the color combinations of these red decks having more removal at their disposal thanks to the other colors provided. This card, though, I do think takes the right build of certain decks. I think if you take any of the red leaders and lean more towards their other colors, Immortal Phoenix just gets harder to play because of that power cost. However, in most red focus builds of red leaders or even more pure hybrid builds that go half and half, this card is super playable in most of those decks. Even a control deck like Kaisa 100% plays this card, so I think every red deck pretty much looks at this card for sure if they're playing at least half of their runes red. Cadrigan, very high statted and high costed card. This guy says when you play him, for every other high mighty unit you control, including himself, you're going to draw a card when you play him. Extremely good, and we did talk about how Vi combos with this card, so even in decks that don't play a ton of mighty units or spam mighty units like Volibear might, this card can have some playability in decks like that, but I do think this is more so just going to be a Volibear staple for now until mighty units get easier to summon in other colors. Really good card though, best top end Volibear has at its disposal for sure. Kaisa Survivor does it all. She is a cheap costed card, has the accelerate option if you need it. When she conquers, she draws, giving you that ever needed card economy. 100% every red deck is looking at this card for sure. I think this definitely deserves a spot in almost every single red deck, except maybe Volibear because she's not mighty, but you still might even consider it there. Insanely strong card. Seems like a no-brainer. Next up is the Red Seal, Seal of Rage. So 100% needed in Darius, right? Because it's a 0 cost Legion activator. Are other red decks playing seals? I think that's one of the things we're still trying to figure out as a community. How staple are seals? And then it's so build dependent, like how much power cost you're playing. Every time you play a seal, it's just a straight -1 from hand when you could have been playing a unit or holding a spell in your hand and just maybe using your energy and runes more efficiently instead of trying to cheat the cost of power. You just use it more efficiently. That could be a player skill thing. These cards are really hard to evaluate. I would call them a staple just on the fact that if you end up playing a red deck and red's going to be your color for a long time, you want to have the option to put seals in your deck if the deck you're playing calls for it. I guess that means it can go playable niche for now, but I would still recommend picking up your 3 seals if they're cheap enough to warrant so without breaking the bank. Volibear Furious, 100% needed in my archetype, and this is the chosen champion of the Volibear deck. The orange one is not really in all that many builds, if any, that I've seen. It's just way too high costed for very little payoff. Volibear, the red one at least, is cheaper and gives your opponent more of a punishment if they actually go ahead and remove this card. So it's the one of you're going to play in your Volibear deck, 100% needed in your archetype. Scrapyard Champion, very cool card, was clutch in the early days before the final 70 cards for Riftbound were revealed. I remember playing this card in Darius, trying to empty out my entire hand, play this with Legion, and then just draw 2. That was a really strong play, a way to refuel my hand. Ever since we got the rest of set 1 reveals, though, I haven't seen this guy used in really any red decks. I'm going to go ahead and probably say unplayable for now. Keep an eye on this card, though, because if there's ever a deck that can drop its hand really easily and then just draw 2 off the Legion, that's going to be a good play a lot of the time. Sundisk, man oh man, I love this card. I do think there's playability in a whole lot of decks. Like I mentioned, it's Legion, and you don't have to play units or even spam a ton of units to get value out of this thing's Legion ability. Bringing your next unit in active mode can be just as beneficial in the Volibear deck as it could be in a Kaisa deck as it is in my Darius deck. So I think this is a card that, especially at a lower rarity, I think every single red deck's going to want to look at, have a play set ready to go just in case the meta leans towards Sundisk. I think this card's really good. Like I said, Kaisa, play a spell, play your blue Kaisa, it comes in ready, go conquer, go activate another spell from your drop. It just accelerates the speed at which you can play if you've managed your runes correctly and have the appropriate Legion fodder to get the rest of your plays going. I love this card. Thermo Beam, 5 cost, 2 red power, action, kill all gear. This is really the only gear removal that red has. However, keep in mind, all the legends give you access to a second color. Most of those second colors have some other form of gear removal that is probably a little bit more cost efficient than this card. However, it's definitely playable in free-for-all, maybe even teams, because now you have more opponents where this card's getting more value if they're playing gears. And if you are in a red deck that for some reason doesn't have access to better gear removal, this is the card you're going to consider. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and put it in sideboard, but keep it in mind for your 4v4 free-for-alls as well. Sky Splitter, this card is insanely powerful, but only gets set up correctly in the right decks. There was a time that I was willing to play this card with like 5 might unit on board, have it reduced to a 3 cost, and then use it to deal 5 damage to a unit in the battlefield, because at that point, it's trading up, and it's not too bad, but again, with the rest of the set 1 reveals, we've gotten better and better removal where this card just doesn't really have to serve that purpose, and you want to use it more so when it's costing you 1 or 0 energy. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and say needed in my archetype pretty much exclusively for Volibear. Captain Farron, another card that I was playing a lot when we didn't have the last 70 or so cards of set 1. Ever since then, haven't really been able to justify playing him. I do think actually with Sundisk, though, he's a lot more interesting because you get that additional assault value more immediately, but that requires you to have a pre-established board and the ability to use Sundisk, activating its Legion, and the card you're playing initially is probably going to be played tapped. So long story short, lots of hoops you have to jump through here. I think for now, Farron is probably going to be in the unplayable slot. I think there are just better cards at the 4-drop red counter, just like Kaisa Survivor, for example. Next up is Iron Ballista. Talked about this card before. I don't think it's all that great. Gonna go ahead and put this one in unplayable. The fact that it's not usable upon play like every single other gear, maybe that would be a little bit too strong, considering you can immediately answer a 2-drop and then every other 2-drop after that while this card's in your base. Maybe that's really strong against some decks, but I think you should have, again, better removal options. Yes, this one is recurable, usable turn after turn, but I don't think it's worth the energy that you're really spending on it, especially if it's just going to be matchup dependent. Noxus Saboteur, I actually really like this card. Let me explain why. So this card says your opponent can't activate hidden cards at battlefields where this thing is. So you're able to shut down Hidden Blade, Zonia's Hourglass, all those kinds of things, right? So the problem with this card is it gets played in your base, usually tapped, and then it's telegraphed. Your opponent knows this is coming to my battlefield that has a hidden. Let me try to preemptively use that hidden. Well, there are going to be some hidden cards that can't really be used that way. One of those is going to be Hidden Blade. If you want to use Hidden Blade before Saboteur comes into your battlefield, you have to use it on your own cards, which given certain circumstances is not going to be great. I mean, you might only have 1 unit in the battlefield, and then you have to give up control of the battlefield anyway just to be able to use your Hidden Blade. That's not a great situation to be in. Yes, there are other hiddens that you can get immediate value off of like Consult the Past, but what's cool about this card is you can use it in conjunction with things like Sundisk, or maybe some other options that allow you to play things ready. Or if you're playing Jinx, for example, there are purple move spells that allow you to move it the turn that you play it, get value off of it that way. So I think there are a lot of good combos with this card. It's a little bit rough on its own if you have nothing else supporting it, but being able to shut down those hiddens, and with Hidden Blade being one of the best hiddens in the game, and this card having a great matchup into that card specifically, I think this is 110% a red sideboard card for most red decks for sure. Next is Raging Soul. If you've discarded a card this turn, I have Assault and Ganking. It is a 4 energy, 4 might, no power cost. So on the back of not having power cost, I like this card. 4 might is a little rough, but the Assault makes up for it quite a bit. And then you got the fact that it activates most of its effects upon discard. Definitely a solid Jinx card. However, I don't know if every single build of Jinx will play it. Every single build of Jinx can play it though, thanks to the fact that it doesn't have power cost. I'm not convinced it's needed in Jinx, but I think it's 100% playable, so we're throwing it in playable niche for Jinx. Get excited, yet another Jinx card, action speed spell, discard a card, deal damage to something equal to the energy cost of the card you discarded. This definitely seemed like a staple in Jinx in early Riftbound pre-final reveal testing, but I think, again, it's just build dependent. There's so many different ways to play Jinx, a lot of which they have their own ways to dump your hand to get Jinx's main effect of drawing an additional card per turn. So this card isn't needed, and it specifically only really pairs well with other high energy cards. If you're playing, for example, maybe like Sky Splitter in your build or other high cost cards. I don't know. For me, I've been cutting this in more and more of my Jinx lists. I think it's for sure playable, but definitely more niche than staple. Hextech Ray, not a bad card. 1 energy, 1 power, action, deal 3 to a unit at a battlefield. So in some cases, this thing can stop a 1 unit conquer all on its own. I don't think it's necessarily main deck stay worthy, but I do think it's a sideboard card that a lot of decks want to consider. Maybe even like your control decks like Volibear, especially Kai'Sa, where early on that's what you're going to use your leader ability for to nullify that power cost. So very good applications in Kai'Sa, decent as anti-aggro and some other red decks, more of a sideboard than a main board in my opinion. Magma Worm, this is one of the best payoffs in the Volibear ramp Dazzling Aurora deck next to Kadrigan. This is what you want to be ramping towards, and this is how you really take back control of a game when you've just been getting scored on over and over and over again. So I'm going to go ahead and put needed in my archetype. I do think ramp builds of Volibear kind of need to play this card just to get back into those games against those aggro decks and reestablish control, because you need to be playing these bombs and have them enter ready to make back that deficit usually. Noxus Hopeful, incredible card. Red has a lot of good low-cost units, so it's pretty easy to get this thing's Legion on board. There's, of course, the entire Darius deck that's meant to do that. I think that this is going to get a look in almost every single red deck. Again, with Legion, you just don't need to be playing other units to do this. You can play spells. So if you want a sort of overstated might unit, you could look at this in a deck like Kai'Sa, right, where you can get that by playing a spell and then playing this, maybe just to have the 4 might guy going in afterwards. So good card. I think it's a red staple for sure. Not every single red deck under the sun will play it, but I do think it's one you want to have in your back pocket. Red Poro, unfortunately probably the worst of the Poros that we got in set 1 Origins. I haven't seen any red decks really spring for this, especially if they're in the colors with the other Poros. The deflect is nice, but he's just so weak that your opponent never really has to choose him with a spell, which basically makes him a vanilla 2/2. Not that great. I think in the future, if there are decks that buff his power efficiently, then he can be like a little bit of a threat. Maybe if there was sort of like Master Yi for red sort of thing. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and drop him in the unplayable, unfortunately. Dangerous Duo, one of the earliest reveals we got, and to be honest with you, I really never played this card even before we got the totality of set 1. I just don't really see it. This thing having Legion, you want to give things +2 after the fact. Like, you want to play something initially that's probably coming in tapped, then play this to get the Legion on something you already had established beforehand. And yes, it's possible, but it's not super efficient. Doesn't seem super competitive in my opinion. Probably throwing this guy in unplayable for now. Brazen Buccaneer, this guy was in almost every single red deck in the early days of Riftbound reveals. However, now that we've gotten better options, he's just not really seeing that much play. There was a lot of really great applications with this card in Jinx, because you could pitch, for example, Flame Chompers and get that into play for free, reduces cost. He had no power, which was really nice. Just a 4 energy, 5 might guy, so slightly overstated, and the discard was mitigated by several different things. You could even combo it with, let's say, like Immortal Phoenix, but I do think now there are just better cards that have the 5 might power that you're looking for. And if you're not playing Jinx, you're playing very specific cards to try to pair with this guy to discard them to the trash, but that's not always going to work out. I do think, however, that once we get more cards that interact with the trash, this card will be good. So if foils are cheap, I would say get them. For now, though, I'm going to go ahead and probably drop this guy in unplayable for now. Chemtech Enforcer, fantastic in Jinx. You want to be discarding cards. Don't really want to be discarding too much in other red decks, so no brainer putting it needed in my archetype for Jinx specifically. Cleave, it's neat. 1 energy, assault 3. That's a lot of stats. I don't see this card played very often. I think if you're trying to win combats via power, a lot of times you're losing out to combat tricks that actually just remove things straight up. So for that reason, probably putting this in the unplayable pile for now. I think removal spells are just way better than a card like this that gives you just raw stats. That's just my take on it anyway. Disintegrate, 4 energy, no power, action, deal 3 to a unit at a battlefield, and if it kills the unit, draw 1. Nice that it has the option to replace itself, but I think this card is just extremely comparable to Void Seeker. Void Seeker costs less energy, yes, does have the power cost, but has a guaranteed draw and deals 4 damage. So I really do think that Disintegrate is just outclassed by Void Seeker in almost every way. Probably throwing this in unplayable for now. Although if you're playing a super spell heavy deck where you just need more removal spells, you might consider it, but I don't even know if Annie would want to play this card, to be completely honest. Flame Chompers for sure, just being played in anything that has discard, namely Jinx, but you can combo it with some other things that in some other colors. But a 3 might for 0 energy cost, never going to be overlooked in my opinion. Legion Rearguard, probably the best 2-drop in red. If we're looking at the tier list right now, we haven't put any other 2-drop units there besides maybe Noxus Hopeful if you want to consider it that. So 100% incredible. 2-2, very fair stats, but it has that Accelerate, which can steal a final point and a key point in the game to win if you absolutely need it. So just the flexibility there, incredible. Definitely being looked at in almost all red decks, in my opinion. Blazing Scorcher, definitely needed in Volibear. It's your 5 energy play that just gets you +1 rune as opposed to having a power cost and setting you even on runes. Other decks have better accelerate options like Kaisa Survivor. Yes, it's lower on might, but it's just got way more value with the draw. So I think you're playing this in Volibear. Not much else unless some sort of random Herald of Scales deck pops up. But again, that would only right now be Volibear because he's the only red-orange leader. So that's where that stands. So we've got every single red card placed here in the tier list. If I missed any cards, let me know in the comments. I don't think I did though. But just going back over a quick look, this seems to line up where a lot of the higher rarity cards are more towards the top, which makes sense. You want your higher rarity cards to be chase cards. But as far as unplayable, I don't think these cards here are going to see a lot of play in red decks, at least in set 1, at least in early set 1. I don't know if I'm going to be wrong on any of these, that maybe they have some hidden potential and I'm just not seeing it. So definitely let me know in the comments below if you see a key combo or key utilization for a card here that I'm just missing. I would love to improve my knowledge about this game as much as I can. I don't know everything, but these are just my initial takes. So let me know in the comments below, guys, what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.